oh my God, I still have a COVID-19 haircut. And hey, nobody needs to see me. So thank you, sponsors. And in the Discord channel, we got a lot of classes coming up off Wild West Hackin Fest, so that's awesome. A lot of new training coming out of there, active countermeasures, threat hunting software. If folks know me, they've seen that stuff before. And of course, Black Hill's doing consulting, and all three together are just really scary and fun. So classes I have coming up. So this is actually an excerpt from a class that I'm going to be teaching in June. That's going to be a 4-day class, 16 hours total. With that class, I really tried to kind of focus on collateral. You know, things like I've seen a lot of classes where they'll teach you how to write like a security policy. And yeah, I'm doing that too. But I'm also giving you a full set of security policies that all you got to do is go in and change the company name, because the whole idea is to kind of get you up to speed as quickly as possible. So this is a little bit of a snippet out of that just to kind of give you a feel for it. But it's also something that I kind of felt like is a really useful conversation to have. It's something I get asked a lot. Let's just start with these two main bullets. Imagine you have a need, some security project you want to kind of get across. It's not about what you want to do. It's about how you present it. It's about the light that you put it in for the people that have the ability to sign off on that. So, you know, if I go in and I say, hey, you know, we need better patching to be more secure. We need to do threat hunting to be more secure. Or we need to improve our authentication to be more secure, or whatever. When you talk to a C-level person about that, two things kind of pop in. One is they're not just security focused. They're looking at the entire business holistically. So really, you need to be doing the same, and we'll talk about that more later. But, you know, when you're talking about, oh, hey, we need to, you know, do threat hunting, they're looking at that, comparing that to, well, customer service also said they have things they need. Sales has stuff that they said they need. Product has stuff they say they need. Engineering has stuff that they say they need. The money bucket is never unlimited. So what you need to do is be able to put things into a light that will prioritize you over other things. And quite honestly, we need to be more secure argument always goes to the bottom of the list, because it's insurance, right? How many people choose not to run car insurance if they can, just because, yeah, no, I won't hit anything. If I just don't hit anything, then, you know, I don't have to worry about that. And a lot of folks have that attitude. And again, when you're talking to a C-level, they're going to be looking at this from the perspective of, well, if we've been broken into before, no. Oh, okay, so, you know, we must be all right with what we have, so why spend more on that? Because, hey, sales needs money to be able to kind of push things forward. So I want you to think about that second bullet item. So this could be trying to accomplish the same goal. We need to be doing threat hunting. Or, you know, we need to be doing a better authentication. Or maybe there's like 50 different things wrong with our security posture, and we want to try and get all of them fixed together. We need to spend money to shorten the sales cycle and reach enterprise customers. One of the things that we tend to kind of miss is that security can be a real enabler. It can make legal's life easier. It can make products' life easier. It can certainly make sales and marketing's lives easier. When we put it into that light, things change drastically. One of the things that I've tried to do consistently over my career is security is always looked at as overhead. And as soon as you looked at as overhead, you looked at an expenditure that we're short on money, cut that first type of thing. And I always try to get us repositioned as sales enablement. Because when you're sales enablement, you're there to help the company make more money. Nobody wants to not make the company more money, right? So you're less likely to kind of get that funding cut. So again, a lot of this really comes down to the way that you really talked. Now, as you kind of come up through security, you know, when you're like a junior analyst, you have like the 5 tasks a day that you're responsible for, and that's it. And you can go in and you can kind of focus in on that, nothing else, and be in good shape. And then as you get more senior, it might be, oh yeah, I'm dealing with vulnerabilities, but I'm also dealing with log review. You know, your scope increases, but it stays inside of security. Once you get to management, you need to expand your purview outside of security. You need to start looking at that whole business model more holistically. And that's an opportunity that I see a lot of individuals miss. You know, I've seen folks that are, you know, they quite honestly have gone all the way up to like director level. So they're director of security, and they live in their own little world of security, and that's it. And you can't do that. You really need to be able to interact with other organizations and be considered a value prop for that. A security leader's job is to bring value to an organization. It's not necessarily just making them more secure. It's bringing value. And when you look at it that way, that tends to kind of open up some additional possibilities. So what I like to do is, so imagine we've got a B2C, business to consumer, or even if it's like business to business, imagine you're like the first security person dropped on that organization. What do you do first? Where do you even start? The first thing I always want to do is get a good read on what are the risks to the business. What are the things that may put us out of business tomorrow? What about the week after that? What about the week after that? Some of those are going to be security related. Some of them aren't. But for the ones that aren't, I need to be able to kind of fairly look at my priorities versus those and kind of handle them accordingly. And really, it's about building alliances. Sounds scary, like, hey, what do I have in common with a salesperson? We'll talk through that. And it's actually more than you might even realize. So security management versus tech roles, like I said, really what changes is you're expected to be able to look at the business more holistically. You're expected to be able to interact with other groups, support their efforts in any way possible within, your specific vertical, and focus on fixing process, not problems. This is a big one I see, and it's kind of that, when a problem comes up, we always kind of want to do the shortest distance between 2 points. What's the quickest way to solve it? And unfortunately, the quickest way to solve it is usually to blame a person. And what I've found with security is very, very rarely is it a person. And if it is a person, it still means something's wrong with the process. We find out patches are missing. It's easy to say, well, Bob screwed up. Well, but did Bob screwed up? Is there a documented process? Is there a ticket that kicks off daily, weekly, whatever it's supposed to be, that tells Bob it's time to start doing patches? Here's how to figure out what's missing. Here's how to get them installed on the system. Is there a decent run book behind this? If all those pieces aren't in place, it's not the person's fault. You can blame them all you want, but that just makes it easy to be able to move on and go on to another problem. The issue with that, though, is 6 months from now, you're going to have that problem again. 9 months from now, you're going to have that problem again. So by going after process versus going after people, it makes it a whole lot easier. The other thing that does is it kind of rewires the way you go about solving problems in general. This really comes in handy when you start working with other organizations. In other words, you get a little bit less snippy about people, and you get a little bit more holistic about, and I know I'm using that term a lot, but it's really applicable in this context. You get more holistic on how do we solve the business problems, not just this person's inefficient or that person's been promoted past what they're capable of or whatever arguments we want to make. Go after process, both within the security vertical as well as outside of that. And a blameless postmortem is a great way to go about doing it. I talked about, okay, we've got an organization, you're the first security person that gets dropped in. What do you do? Step one for me is understand the businesses and the challenges. What are the risks to the business? Go through and assess that for yourself. Then go through and figure out, okay, how do I go about solving this problem? Typically, it's with security attestations. I'll talk about that more detail later. But security attestations have certain controls around them. Next step is to figure out how do I meet those security controls. Once you get those in place, now you need to make it a maintainable system, meaning that you need a way to make sure the controls are being implemented properly, that they're being checked properly, that when an auditor comes in, they're going to be happy with what they say. Typically, at this point, you also need to start building out a team in order to be able to support this effort, as well as hopefully kind of slide into your role as you kind of move up the ladder. I'm not going to go through all of these in this presentation, but I at least wanted to give you kind of this quick overview, because a lot of folks will drop into a new environment and say, gee, where do I even start? What's the first thing I need to be doing? This is my action item list I go through, and it seems to work quite well. So step one, assess unique business need, meaning one of the things you want to look at is how can you add value to the organization? And I'll give you a very common one I run into all the time. I talked about go out and start talking to other teams. When I talk to the sales team, especially if you're in an environment where you're business to business, meaning you're selling some sort of service that other businesses consume, security tends to be an inhibitor to the sales process. Typically, what will happen is a customer will come in, and when you're business to business, you're going to be managing some amount of their data for them, which means they need to be able to trust you, which means they need to kind of understand what your security posture is, which means they got to find out what is your security posture. So what I've found is that for an environment that really hasn't ramped up their security program yet, if you go talk to salespeople, one of the first things they're going to tell you is, yeah, one of the things that makes our sales cycle take so long is they send us this list of like 300 security questions we got to answer, and nobody can answer all of them. And so it gets passed around to a bunch of folks. And, that's adding 6 weeks, 3 months, whatever the magic number is, that's adding some large amount of time to the sales cycle. Great. So think about that. So what the salesperson's just told you is if you can improve security within that environment, you can shorten the amount of time it takes to close a deal. That frees up salespeople to go after other potential prospects, which means more sales, which means more money for the company. See where we're going with this. So again, if I go to a C-level and say, hey, we need better authentication to be more secure, yeah, okay, that's overhead. I'll prioritize that versus everything else. But if you're going to a C-level and you're saying, hey, I think I have a way to drop our sales cycle from 3 months down to 3 weeks. And I think I have a way for us to be able to reach enterprise customers that have revenue streams of $500 million a year or more, which we've been having trouble breaking into. And here is my plan to do that. Think about a business owner. When you bring them that argument instead, they're going to pay attention to what you have to say. What you want to try to implement is going to be taken very seriously because they want to grow the business. You're offering them an opportunity to grow the business. So that's something they're going to grab onto. So look for where security can remove inhibitors for other groups being able to get their job done. Look for ways to kind of integrate without what's out there. One of the natural progressions, and I see a lot of folks do it, is when they go into a role. So again, you're that first security person who comes down to the job. The first thing we tend to align with is the IT group, right? That kind of makes sense because we're there to kind of help with cybersecurity, and they're the ones running the systems that we're going to want to secure. So it kind of makes sense to kind of sync with them first. And I'm not saying don't sync with IT, but what I am saying is that if there's a legal department, you are going to get much further syncing with legal first because they're going to have that high-level perspective of what are the risks to the businesses. The legal people are probably going to be involved with the contract process that sales is dealing with, and they're going to be able to say, yeah, hey, it takes forever because of all these damn security questions, and nobody knows how to answer them. Okay, great. Now, one of the things you can do to endear yourself to legal is to say, hey, I'm here for you as a resource. If you're going through a contract and the security requirements and you don't understand them, you're not sure how to answer them, pull me in. Let me help you out. Well, now you've just made legal's life easier. And if you're talking with the legal folks and saying, oh, hey, yeah, this thing that customers always get hung up on that we don't do, I want to do that. Now you've got legal as your backup when you go to try to get funding for this. And this is where things really change. A lot of times when we go to senior management, we say, we need this new process or we need this new software in order to be able to make things more secure. We're kind of there on our own. And it's security versus every other department that wants something. But if you walk into a senior level meeting and you bring, let's say, the head of sales and the head of legal with you, and both of them are saying, yeah, we need to do this. This is going to make our life easier. What do you think that does for your argument? How much more likely do you think it makes it that you're going to get the funding you need to be able to push forward whatever projects you want to do? So like I said, I know IT tends to be the kind of first thing we gravitate to, and certainly we want to be in sync with IT. That makes sense. But as part of that initial risk assessment for the organization, IT doesn't really have a lot to offer there. They build the infrastructure, but they kind of follow the lead of senior management. And it's senior management you really need to be able to go and tweak. So start with some interviews. And again, if you're new hire, this is a perfect opportunity to be able to get out there and kind of introduce yourself, let folks know who you are, and let folks see what you're bringing to the table. I like to target middle management. Doesn't mean you don't want to talk to senior people. It doesn't mean like you can get time with like the senior VP of sales or whatever. It's a bad idea. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is that if you go to the senior VP of sales, they probably don't understand what the problems are in the trenches. They probably don't understand. They know the sales cycle takes 3 months, but they don't necessarily know that half of that is because of the security questions. You want to go to managers, you want to go to the people on the front lines that are dealing with that. So team leads, director levels, these are the type of folks that you really want to go in and kind of introduce yourself to and really kind of take this from the perspective of, hey, how can I make your life easier? I'm here to make the environment more secure. I want to lower the risk to this organization. But part of that is also, enabling you to do your job better. I don't want to be implementing draconian controls, even though you're going to see I'm going to implement some draconian controls, but we'll cover that one a little bit more later. And the more war stories you can get, the better. I had a particular environment I was working with, and they were having problems getting funding. I was helping them out with some other things, some other projects, but I saw that this was going on at the time. And one of the things we found out was they lost Amazon as a customer in the prospect stage because of this security setup. Bring that to senior management. Hey, you could have had Amazon as a marquee customer, and you blew it because of security. And here's what we need to do to get ourselves to where an Amazon or somebody like that would be able to use us as a vendor. That carries an awful lot of weight because the Amazons, the Googles of the world, everybody wants to say, oh, yeah, they're a customer of ours. Leverage that. Leverage that as you go through. So specific war stories, definitely a good thing to kind of pull into all this. So as you go through this, try to get some metrics, or at least the best you can. So like I said, it takes us 3 months to close a sales deal, and 2 months of that is answering security questions. Great. That is a statistic that you want to make sure that you grab onto. Don't go too far down the rabbit hole with this. I've seen situations where people have said, I know what I'll do. I'll go through every lost deal for the last year, find out the reason the deal was lost, and list the specific time frame that was wasted. And you can go that far down the rabbit hole, certainly, but what you need is something better than anecdotal, something that they can kind of cut their teeth on and validate. If you go into a C-level meeting and say, hey, it's taken us 3 months to close sales deals because of security stinks, I can help us get that down to 2 weeks or a week or whatever the case may be, and here's what I want to do. One of the things they're going to do is they're going to go to sales, if you don't have them in the room already, and say, hey, so I hear it takes 3 months to close a deal. Yep, it does. And I hear 2 months of that is because security questions. Oh my God, we deal with that all the time. It's horrible. So you want to make what you say something that can be validated, but it doesn't necessarily have to be granular, if that makes sense. A lot of C-levels kind of like tune out as soon as you get too granular with what's going on. So if you consider what we're doing, I've seen a lot of folks go into an environment, and the first thing they start implementing is controls. And one of the things you run into is everybody else in the organization is like, why are they doing this? I've been using a login name and password to get to my email since I got here. Why are you now making me use a second factor? This sucks. I don't want to have to do it. They don't see any value with it. But again, if you can make the argument, hey, we need to do this to get these security attestations that all enterprise customers look for, so this is going to help us make more sales. And what's kind of nice about that is, so let's say you want to do two-factor authentication on email. You're going to have some number of folks that are going to push back against it. And they're going to make arguments like, well, my email, the email's never been broken into. Why the hell are we doing this? And for a senior person, there can be some validity to those arguments. If you have actual business goal, I want to shorten the sales cycle, and you're pushing towards that, now anybody who bucks that system becomes an inhibitor to that goal. And no one wants to be that inhibitor to that goal. No one wants to have a business owner go to them and say, Bob, we're trying to increase sales by bringing in enterprise customers. Why are you fighting that? Oh my God, nobody wants to hear that from a company owner, right? Why are you trying to make us make less money, Bob? You don't want to be Bob in that situation, right? So again, a lot of this is about framing it correctly so that it's really hard to try and make an argument against it. So that's sales ennoblement that I talked about. So this kind of brings us to compliance, because when you kind of talk about what's one of the tools we have to work with, compliance is it. And I know a lot of folks are going to argue, oh, compliance isn't real security. And yeah, you're right, but we'll kind of cycle back into that later. Really what compliance is it's kind of a point of reference. If I go to you and I say, hey, what's your security look like? And you say, well, yeah, my security's good. Okay, what does that mean? Now I got to ask you 300, 500 questions about your security to really get a read on it. If you say to me, oh, we've got our SOC 2 for security type 2, and we've been maintaining that for 3 years now. Okay, I don't know your exact security controls, but I have an idea of what your framework looks like. We're a little bit, we're a little bit closer to me feeling warm and fuzzy about what you're doing because I'm able to kind of wrap my brain around it a little more. That's really what compliance brings to the table. And the nice thing about it is that, we kind of get to be the ones that control this, which I'll kind of run into as we go through. So this is really about simplifying that extension of trust. So again, that whole sales cycle. Imagine we're a business-to-business company. We're selling some service, and we've got another business that comes to us. Typically, they're going to want to know that their data, when it's on our network, is as safe as it is on their own. So whatever security attestations they have, they want to make sure we've got similar types of controls in place as well. So if an enterprise customer comes to you and says, hey, so what's your security look like? And you say, oh, we meet the EU privacy guidelines, we're SOC 2 compliant, we're PCI DSS compliant, we're ISO 27001 compliant. Now it just becomes a checkbox. And it's literally that. So when you get into things like SOC 2, there's a couple of different ways you can go about getting your attestation for that. One is referred to as type 1. And with a type 1, it's just kind of a snapshot in time. A type 2 looks at it over a period of time, and you get to pick that period of time. So it could be 3 months, it could be a year. Most environments do it annually. So every year they come in and get an annual SOC 2, so it shows, hey, look, our controls have been in place the whole time. And my experience has been, don't worry about that for a while. Meaning that when someone's talking to you saying, what security attestations do you have? If you say, oh, we're SOC 2 compliant, check. That gets checked off their list. They're done. They might want to see a copy of your attestation just to make sure you're not lying. That checks off that list. That removes that inhibitor to be able to go through and do that sale. Oh, that was weird. I'm not sure why my slides presentation decided to just needed to update itself. There we go. So yeah, keep things in that framework there. So it's, like I said, it's a security reference. Because you want to avoid stuff like this. If you don't have any attestations, now what I'm down to is I'm down to asking you questions. And oh, by the way, you can leverage these really well. So when I used to run security groups, part of that was, marketing would come to me and say, hey, we got this third-party vendor that we want to use to help us upsell to our existing customers. Okay, that would tell me all of our customer information is going to go into their database. I want to make sure their database is okay. Go to them and, hey, here's a questionnaire. And the questionnaire would typically be, are you SOC 2 compliant? If so, great, you're done. If not, answer these next 50 questions. Are you PCI compliant? If so, great, you're done. If not, answer these next 100 questions, type of thing. But you can do some really cool stuff with the questions. Like this one here, number 19, job title of the individual responsible for the information security team. I'm going to throw a question out there, and I'm going to give you a second to kind of ponder and think about this. Maybe throw what you think in Discord. What if that says CEO? Kind of sounds good though, right? CEO. Hey, who's responsible for security? CEO, buck stops with him. He's responsible for security. Is that a good answer or is that a bad answer? What do people think? So for me, that's a bad answer. Look at the questions before that. Is there a dedicated information security team? If so, how many people do you have? Those are numbers that can kind of be butts to it. 17, it's kind of hard to not directly lie. But like how many people are part of the information security team? I've seen vendors like claim their IT group is part of that. And these other people are part of that. Oh yeah, they help with security stuff, therefore they're part of that team. Yeah, no, bad answer. Yeah, exactly. I see a couple of them, bad figurehead. Yeah, absolutely. Also, they're not in the day-to-day operation, right? If your CEO is focused on security in your company, you're not going to have a company for very long because there's so many other things going on in the organization that they need to have their eye on the ball. And if they don't, you're in trouble. So for that, I want to see something like director of security, manager of security, chief security officer, something along those lines that tells me, yeah, this is somebody with some clout, not just senior analyst. Okay, so you got one security person and that's it, and they probably report up through IT. Awesome. Here's another fun one. So question 21, is this team responsible for risk analysis and assessment? I word that question that way for a reason, because when you read that, if you're trying to answer this questionnaire in as positive a way as you possibly can, it's real easy to look at that question and say, oh, yeah, security deals with assessing that risk all the time. So sure, yeah, the answer to that is yes. Well, then you get down to 27, and this asks, is there an actual risk assessment program? Has it been signed off by senior management? Is there somebody who owns it, is responsible for reviewing it and going through and doing a formal risk assessment every 6 months? If they answer yes on 21, but no on 27 and 28, no, that makes no sense. Either all of them are yes or all of them are no. So I will specifically add in additional questions that kind of ask the same thing, but in a slightly different way, just to kind of see what answers I get back. Because I've gotten these back where everything sounds good, but when you see the conflict in the questions, that lets you know the person who answered this was just checking boxes because they want to close this deal as quickly as they can. I also look at things like how quickly do they turn this around to me? If I send them a 300 question questionnaire and they turn that around within hours, yeah, no, I'm sorry. Somebody just sat down, checked a couple of boxes, and that's done. Because even if it's like the director of security that's doing this, there's some things they need to go back and reference before they can answer at least a couple of these questions. So again, these can be a great way for you to get a handle on your vendors and how they work. But it's something you want to have to avoid doing with your customer prospects. And again, going through and having your attestations kind of helps with that. So the compliance versus security. This is the argument I always hear. Compliance doesn't equate to security. And absolutely it does not. But it gives you a path forward to money. And that's the part for me that matters. Again, if we change it from we're trying to secure the environment to we're supporting privacy so that we don't get sued, and we're putting controls in place so that insurance becomes cheaper, and we're shortening the sales cycle and being able to go after larger customers, and compliance is what allows those things to happen, that now opens up the money strings, right? Once the money gets turned on, we get a lot of control over how that goes through, because quite honestly, we're the ones that need to go through and kind of identify what these controls mean, because a lot of these are vague. And as the senior security person in the organization, it's really going to kind of come down to you to be able to interpret what they mean. And I'll give you a good example. So here's a control that says, internal and external system users are identified and authenticated when accessing the system components. Okay, I understand what that means. We want to authenticate people, but the process to do it is incredibly vague. Can we have one set of credentials that everybody shares? This doesn't say it has to be on a unique user level we're authenticating, just that we've authenticated them. Oh, hey, here's the same logon password that everybody's been using for 5 years now. If somebody uses that, they must be part of the company. So yeah, everybody just log in with that account. I mean, I'm not saying you should do that. But notice that by the letter of the way that thing is written, you could get that vague if you wanted to. Does it mean single factor? Does it mean two factor? That comes down to what do you think is necessary to actually authenticate that that user is in fact who you think they are? You might be okay with just login, name, password, and calling it done. You might want a second factor in there. And you get control over this. So as part of trying to meet this attestation, what a lot of these PCI is a little different. PCI has specific things you must do. You must have a 8-character password that gets changed every 90 days. It is specific controls like that. But for the rest of them, they tend to be kind of generic like this. And so long as you're doing what your policy specifies, meaning if you're doing single factor or two factor, as long as you have a policy that identifies this is what you must do, and you can show process and audits that validate it's being used the way it's supposed to, you're going to pass this control and you'll be okay. But you get to define it. So you get to interpret the levels of security here. So roll this back to, hey, I have an important security project that I want to push through, and I'm having trouble getting money for that. Well, this kind of turns into a piggy bank that you kind of divvy out the money the way that you think you need it. So you might go in and say, hey, no, I want everybody to have login, name, password. I want biometrics. I want a second factor. I want all 3 possible ways of authentication being used all the time. And you can do that. But that's going to take money away that you could have spent someplace else. Or you could go at this and say, okay, login, name, password's okay, but I'm going to spend that extra money that would have gone to authentication in another place. And it becomes your judgment call to kind of figure it out that way. So just something to kind of keep in mind as you go through this. This model here, if you look at the left-hand side, this is your typical cloud model. got a building, you've got a network inside of it that wires together a bunch of CPUs and disk storage possibilities. There's maybe a hypervisor running on top of that you can now run virtual machines. There's some sort of solution stack, meaning this might be C++, this might be Perl, it might be, pick your poison, it might be Golang, whatever it is you want to use. Then the applications on top of that you're using, and then the actual interaction with that application. So it might be a user interface, it might be an API so that different systems can talk to each other. So if you think of how our software works, here's the whole stack here. And then to the right, I've kind of broken out, here's your different types of technologies you can leverage to go in to kind of help protect this stuff. So for example, like your network cables and your computer, you can protect those with authentication. You can protect those with physical restraints. We're going to put them in a locked room that electrocutes people if they type in the wrong code or, whatever it is you want to go in and set up. Physical helps there, but physical certainly isn't going to help protect that application if it's exposed on the internet. So as you go through and you kind of figure out, how do I want to implement my security, keep those controls in mind, but keep this layered defense in mind as well. We talk about defense in depth. This is it in a nutshell. How we want to make sure we've got some amount of coverage for every layer of that stack all the way through. There are times to carry a big stick, but this is not one of them. And this is one of the mistakes I see people make, is that they let authority go to their head and they try to get very pushy with security and they try to carry a big stick. No, thou shalt do it this way. And you don't have to. If you have a good story, I'm trying to reduce the amount of time it takes us to close sales deals. I'm trying to put us in a position to be able to approach much larger enterprise customers that'll pay us a lot more money for using our product. If that is your goal, it's going to be really hard for everybody to not get behind that goal as you push it forward. And now it doesn't have to be, oh, hey, Bob's not following this process or whatever. You don't need the big stick thing. Now it kind of comes down to, you can be passive aggressive. Bob, why do you want to inhibit our sales growth? Bob, what do you have against us making more money? I mean, you certainly don't want to phrase it exactly that way because it's very obvious you're coming off as passive aggressive. But hey, if you're in security, you've probably got some social engineering skills. Leverage them here. It's really going to pay off in spades. Because now it kind of turns into an argument that, well, Bob doesn't want to do this. The judgment call for that goes above me. But if Bob's given his way, we can't get this attestation, and sales are going to continue to suffer. So if we want to sell less to make Bob happy, certainly we can do that if you want to. No one's going to want to buy off on that. So again, think about, never just respond. Think it through before you actually go through and respond to any type of pushback that you're getting, but be even-handed in it. And you may find that there's actually a couple of different attestations that are potential targets that you might want to go after. And you have to worry about EU privacy and worry about PCI. Great. Now you want to look at, what are the overlaps in those controls? Meaning that there's a ton of different security attestations out there, but quite honestly, they all have an awful lot in common with each other. The Cloud Security Alliance Control Matrix is your friend. It is a spreadsheet you can download off of the Cloud Security Alliance website. If you've never seen this document, I highly, highly, highly recommend you pull this document down. Because what it does is it gives you a general descriptor. Users must be authenticated before accessing the system. And then what it does is, in a bunch of different columns, it identifies, 20, 25 different security attestations that are out there, and it identifies which control in them are responsible for that item that's just listed. So now if you're going through and you're saying, okay, I'm going to meet EU privacy, and then I'm going to go after PCI, there's overlap there. This will help you find those spots of overlap. So that makes it a whole lot easier to kind of lay your map forward as to what attestations to go for first. And here's just a possible execution example, meaning that every environment's different. What security attestations make sense for you. But really the goal here is start with the simple wins first, like the EU privacy. There's some big, serious controls there that have a big amount of fine money behind it if you don't follow them. But the number of controls is relatively small. It's usually a little bit easier to go after that versus like an ISO 27001 right out of the gate. So start with the simple stuff first, build up from there. SOC 2, I talked about start with type 1, move to type 2. So the other thing with SOC 2 is that there's a number of different verticals you can go after. You can go after your ability to recover from a disaster. You can go after security. There's another one for privacy, and they all have their own different sets of controls in them. You could choose to go after everything. What I would do is I would let my prospects drive this for me. And I would sell it this way to upper management, because that kind of says you're not going to just waste money, that you're actually trying to make sure that you're providing value. I would go through it and say, hey, look, let's just do a type 1 first. And now we'll start listing that as one of the benefits you get of buying our product. And let's see if anybody pushes back on that. And if nobody pushes back on that, great. We'll just stick with the type 1 and call it a day. And then maybe move on to ISO 27001 or something else instead. If our prospects are saying, well, gee, a type 1 is nice, but we really need a type 2, if you're in some sort of a business where they're really going to split hairs over that, well, great. You've already got the type 1 done. You're partway there. Now let's build on that and go after the type 2 now that you know you need it. So again, how to roll these out in what order, kind of think it through, start simple, work up from there, and always kind of leverage, is it accomplishing whatever goal you wanted to achieve? Reducing insurance, shortening the sales cycle, whatever that happened to be, is it achieving that goal? If not, we may need to do a little bit more. If so, yeah, maybe we need to move our focus into a different direction. Just to kind of review. So we've walked into this organization, we've sat down with the legal team, the sales team, the product team, the marketing team, anybody we can think of. Hey, what's your life like? Where can I, as a security person, maybe make your job a little bit easier? Get quotes on that. Figure out what you want your target to be. Now, once you've kind of figured out what your target should be, figure out what security attestations make sense for your organization, the execution order on it. Now you've got a plan. Now you've got a long-term plan. It's not walking in saying, well, I'm here to make things more secure. Well, yeah, but this is the actual process I'm going to follow to get there. And turn this into a slide deck. Keep this short and simple. And this is really the hardest part that people have, is if you're if you're in security, you've got a little bit of OCD. You have to. Otherwise, you're going to miss stuff all the time. I've been at this for many years. I will admit I am definitely OCD about some things. That has helped me immensely in my security career. So we tend to get very detail-oriented in what we're doing. And again, with C-levels, don't go there, not unless they're asked. Give them the 50,000-foot view of the plan that you want to move forward, and that's it. So limit yourself to 10 slides or less. And you're going to have an intro and an exit slide. So really, you've got maybe 8 to work with. And figure out how to fit it in those 8 slides. If you go through 8 slides and you say, oh, this isn't enough, I need 8 more slides to get this done, you know you're doing it wrong. Whittle it back. You're at 20,000 feet if you need 16 slides. Go up to 50,000 feet. What can you pull out of that slide presentation? Leverage that as follow-up later. If somebody does ask a question about it during the presentation, great. That can be follow-up later. It can be answered as part of Q&A. Keep it high level. Keep it simple. Talk about what problem you want to go through and solve, and pitch this to your boss first, see how it flies with them. And if it flies well from there, now it's time to kind of move it up the food chain. And how that's going to work really depends upon your organization and who you have for a reporting cycle. So for example, if you're reporting to me, when I'm in that director, VP level, whatever, and you sound like you know your stuff, I'm pulling you into the C-level meeting and I'm letting you do this presentation. I'm going to let you own the good job that you're doing. If I'm uncomfortable that you might be smarter than me, and that makes me not sleep well at night, and I get a little nervous that, oh my God, I got somebody working for me that might be better than me, I might want to take this and I might want to be the person that presents it up so that way I can make it look like I own it. I'm not saying that's proper management. It's not. I'm not saying that it's a good idea. I'm not saying you shouldn't hear that, maybe say, am I in the right organization? Maybe I should be shopping around. I'm just saying, hey, it's a possibility. And it may be worth, if your boss wants to own it, great, let them own it. If you haven't gone through this process before, it may be worth it to have them own it just so you can go through this process and kind of hone out your skills. Keep your presentation to a half an hour. That's why I said 10 slides. So you're going to talk for a half an hour max, 25 minutes or so, even better, and leave the rest of the time for Q&A. You want a little bit of bonding in the front, kind of like we do here. We go through and we do some pre-show banter. There's a reason for that. it allows us to all kind of connect with each other first. Leverage that type of thing. Now, that doesn't mean, you use the same salty language we use here, unless that's appropriate for the environment you're in. And it doesn't mean you do it for a whole half hour. But that introduction to kind of get an idea of everybody's flow, that really kind of helps people feel like they're in sync with each other. Leverage that. So 5 minutes, kind of some pre-show banter, 25 minutes going through the slides, leave the rest of it for Q&A. Possible. Part of that last half hour will be Q&A. Part of it's going to be, okay, what are potential next steps? Have a plan ready to go. Have backup slides. So have your 10, but if there's some technical stuff that you feel like, okay, I might get asked this, and if I do, I can't really explain it with hand puppets. I kind of need a slide to be able to talk it through. Great, make that part of your backup. Don't show it as part of your main presentation. But if you get asked a question about it, feel free to go ahead and kind of pull it out and use it from there. And make sure you do good follow-up on this. Own this as a project. Be perceived as the person that's going to be able to run this to ground. So this may be right after the meeting, hey, here's a copy of the deck for everybody, just so you have it as a reference. And Jane had a question about X, and I didn't have a straight answer. Well, don't go down that road. But, and oh, by the way, Jane asked about blah-de-blah. Here's the answer to that specific question. Would love to get a feeling for next steps on this. Make sure there's follow-up after the meeting. And again, make sure it's kind of identified that it's not just kind of out there, hey, we need to do this and I don't know what's going to happen. Own the situation. Because again, company owner, they're looking at this saying, okay, this sounds good. Shortened sales cycle, less likely to get sued. I'm liking all those things, but who's going to run it to ground? If you've shown you've done this research, you've shown, hey, I brought a legal person and a salesperson high level into this meeting to back me up on this. You're showing yourself to be able to play at this level. You're more likely to be able to get the funds you need. And expect some negotiation. That's not uncommon. In fact, a lot of times I'll put a little padding in here. Put padding in for two reasons. One is things never go as well as you think they will. So if you think it's going to take you 6 months, it's probably going to take you a year. If you think you need 3 people, you're probably going to need 5. So don't go crazy, but it's okay to pad a little bit, knowing that some folks, and you can get a read out of this out of your own organization, some folks don't feel like they're doing their job unless they negotiate you back off a little bit. Like, oh, hey, you said you needed $100,000 to do this, and you may have counted the pennies to make sure that was right, but they're just not going to be able to sleep at night unless they negotiate you back to like 80 grand. Because, hey, I just earned 20,000 we can use someplace else. Read your environment. Keep that in mind as you go through and do this. And there may be a need for follow-up meetings on this. If it all goes well, there won't be. Because really, you want to lay this out in a fashion of, here it all is, and we can move forward from here. And now it's either execute or not. There should be very little that needs to go happen beyond maybe some email-based negotiations. And like I said, this is going to be all part of the 4-day class I'm doing. This is a portion of it. And also filling in a lot of these blanks, like security assessment that I talked about. How do you read how do you create one? Well, I'm going to give you one as collateral, so you don't have to create your own. And then how do you read it? We're even going to go through and do some labs along the lines of, okay, hey, you got a security questionnaire that was filled out this way. What does this tell you about that organization? There's an awful lot of that going in there as well. Also, I've had a lot of requests. We've been doing that 1-day threat hunting class. I've had a lot of requests to do a 2-day that's mostly hands-on. I'm in the process of working through that now. It's looking like maybe August we'll be running that course. And that'll be the same thing. It'll be 4 hours a day over 4 days, 16 hours total. Cost to be about $400. But where I'm going with that one is that whole threat hunting process is start of the network, pivot to the host. How do you go in and find the bad stuff? Let's take a bunch of different C2 channels, go through them one at a time, work it out as a solid process, basically vet something that you can now take back to your organization and immediately implement. And with that, if there's any questions, go ahead and throw them into Discord or throw them into the questions channel. Let's see, I'm going to go back on screen, and if anybody's got a handle on any questions that we have, feel free to just ask away.
Do we have a Bill Stearns with us? Do we have a Bill Stearns?
I think we do.
It would just be nice to have a Bill Stearns.
We certainly
with
do.
us. Yeah, hop in on here, Bill.
Yep, life is just not complete without a Bo Stearns.
All right. So from Burby, how would you formulate your pitch goals if you don't sell a product or service, e.g., local government?
So if you're local government, there's still controls that you're expected to meet. So I would go back to those controls. Now, if you're already meeting them, yeah, you're in kind of a tougher spot there. Now sometimes it does come back to kind of an insurance negotiation unless you can actually show instances of bad things happening in the past. One thing that can be helpful is external pen tests. I've seen that with Black Hills a lot where they get hired for a pen test and they'll go in, they'll get in, they'll go undetected, and then all of a sudden there's budget money available to be able to go in and, hey, we need to get better at threat hunting. So you may be able to go in and kind of leverage something like that.
All right, next one. Are there additional risk of derailment when including outside departments in security request meetings with upper management? If yes, how can we mitigate the risk?
So it's kind of that, in most environments, every department's kind of looking out for their own stuff. If you go in as we are here to assist you. We're here to kind of help you out. I'll give you a good example. The development team and the product team in a software company, very rarely do they bump heads because it's recognized they kind of have aligned goals. They're both trying to get the same thing done. You want to have security perceived that way. So again, if you're worried about like sales derailing you, well, then you need to do a better job with sales, showing them, hey, I'm trying to make your life easier. I'm trying to make it easier for you to make your goals so you get your spiff, so that you get to go to a Caribbean island, and maybe I don't, but that's okay. I want to help you get that top sales goal so you can get to a Caribbean island. If you come at it from that aspect, now it's gone from they're guarding their own stuff to it's self-defeating. If they push against you, they'll find somebody else to push against instead.
So I was eating a cookie, and then I realized I was on camera.
How do you avoid getting too technical with execs, like discussing transition? Yeah.
Yes, that.
So that goes back to that. So two things. One is that goes back to understanding what are their goals. And very rarely are their goals technical. Very rarely are their goals, should we be using CentOS or Ubuntu? C-level, don't know, don't care, just make this work. So keep that in mind as you're making the arguments with them. If you're falling back on technical arguments, you're also kind of missing that translation piece that I talked about. So if I'm if I'm a CEO, I'm not that technical with security. That's not my job. So your job is to translate your technical stuff into speak that will make sense to me, like, hey, I'm going to make sure we don't get sued for going sideways on the EU privacy regulations, or, I'm going to reduce sales, or, again, whatever the case may be. So figure out what their language is. You do the translation so that it's absolutely not technical.
One of the things that I talk about when I'm giving talks to new people who are just looking for jobs as they come out of college, everybody who's hired is hired to solve a problem.
Yeah.
If you don't know what problem you were hired to solve, you've got to figure that out soon. Use that same approach when you're talking to the C-levels. Say to yourself, what problem are they trying to solve? And what can I do to help them with that problem? You don't go in with a wish list saying, here's what I want. You go in with an offer list saying, here are the things I can help you resolve, and here's how I propose we do it. It's a much more positive way and much less adversarial.
Yeah, and own your stuff. The other aspect I've seen of that too is it's really easy to say, oh, my senior managers are idiots. They don't get it. They don't understand we need to be more secure. Okay, maybe they're dumb. Give it the benefit of the doubt. Maybe you do have that problem to solve, but it's still your problem to solve. It's still your problem to put it into a light that they're going to be able to understand, to get them to get on the same page that you are. So it's, like I said, it's that people versus process thing. It's easy to kind of to dismiss the situation by saying my senior management just doesn't get it and leaving it at that. What that should be forcing you to do is to say, how do I change what I'm doing and change this process so that it can eventually get them on board?
I have a topic I want the two of you to maybe talk about. So I saw on Twitter the other day, and I don't remember who posted it, but she said management was upset with her, and I'm paraphrasing. Management was upset with her because once she came on board, they'd had 29 security incidents or something. Prior to that, they had had 0.
Sorry, I didn't totally follow that. Say that again?
Yeah.
Sorry.
So before she came on board, they had had 0 incidents. Now that she had been on board, they had 29 incidents. And so her thing was that because you'd never been able to detect them prior to me being here.
That's exactly it. That simply not counting the number of people who have coronavirus does not mean that nobody has coronavirus. The attacks are happening all the time. Jason, you know this, and Chris, you know this. The attacks are happening all the time. Some are successful, some are not. And the fact that you simply don't have the visibility to see that they're there doesn't mean they're not happening. I can tell you right now, 12 people are attacking the network I'm sitting on.
So what I would do is I would change the metric, because that metric is looking at raw quantity. A year ago before I was here, we detected no attacks. Now that I'm here, we detected 29. What I would look at is how long were they on the network before they were detected? Because now you can change that metric to say, hey, a year ago, they were on the network forever. And no one was detecting them. Or, hey, I detected them when I came on board. So for attacks that happened before I got here, they owned our network for a year. For attacks that got on our network after I got here, we're getting them back off the network again in 30 days. Same numbers, but it looks a whole lot better. Again, it's all in how you kind of interpret it and all in how you pitch it.
Yeah.
Make sense, Jason?
Yep, makes sense. So we had a question here from GoToWebinar. Said, sorry, I missed the first couple of minutes and heard something about providing policies for the 4-day class. What else may I have missed? What else other than security assessment and policies do we get with the course? Thank you. Thank you, Jesse.
Oh, God. I'd have to go back and look at what I included in the collateral. It's basically like all the stuff you would normally have. So imagine you've gone into an environment that has nothing. What are all the things that you need to build that are time consuming, like that vendor assessment, like policies? That's something that we're just supplying as collateral along with the class. If you go to the Wild West Hackin Fest site, I think I listed a lot of the stuff out there. So you can go kind of check that out.
Yeah, Shelby, can you post a link for us back in Discord? All right. And then how do we spin the paradigm for the small businesses that are not yet clients, i.e. prospects?
Sorry, I'm just looking at Wicked Witch's post. Turn off AV and all the malware goes away. Yeah, it kind of does, right? That solves that problem. Like Bill said, just don't look at it anymore. Yes, smaller customers, definitely tougher. So so are we talking about like we're going into a company that only has 20 people into it as an employee, or we're consulting? I'd love to kind of get some clarity around that, because
it looked like consulting.
Yeah. Yeah, that one's tough. So, back in my days when I was consulting, I had some rules, and most of them revolved around small organizations that I just don't want to work with, like lawyers or accountants. Accountants because they just do really bad things sometimes, and lawyers because they'd just rather take you to court than actually pay you. So with a small organization, yeah, you're right. It is really hard sometimes to kind of get them to kind of lock things down. And, budget is a major concern because they're looking to kind of run an office. They're not necessarily looking to scale. If they're not looking to scale, a lot of these things really don't come up. You might be able to get away with some anecdotal evidence. A lot of times they don't see it, meaning that I have talked to lawyers that don't realize that there are law firms getting broken into, and those very, very private customer records are getting pulled out of there. Stuff like that might be helpful. But yeah, with a smaller organization, it's really tough.
Chris, we have to cover this one real quick. Jason, is that the Highlander or the Braveheart sword in the background? And do you walk into a C-level meeting wielding it?
That's true.
Yep. So that is a Claymore. I don't think it's necessarily from either of those series. And yeah, no, I don't. Well, it's funny because I was going to say, no, I don't bring it to work, but actually I had a game company I worked at many years ago called Looking Glass Technologies, and I did used to walk the halls with that sword over my shoulder. So, it can help.
So we're at the top of the hour, so what we're going to do right now is we're just going to kill the recording so that everyone online, that way it stays below an hour. Then, over an hour, it's like, well, I don't know if I have that kind of commitment.
Thank you to everybody who turned out.
Yep. So thank you for being here. We're going to kill the recording and stick around for just a few more minutes and answer just a few more questions. But if you need to go, we understand. So bye-bye, and thanks for being here for today's Wild West Hacking Cast with Chris Brenton on how to sell security to C-levels.
I don't know, Keith, when's the last time you actually had shoes on?
Actually, this weekend I came to visit you. I had shoes on because I had to drive.
Yeah,
and I would like to say that.
And for anybody concerned, we did social distance. Keith came over. We were in my backyard. He was on one end of it. I was on the other.
Mm-hmm.
So we had plenty of social space between us.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I was careful not to spew my droplets everywhere.
And dude, that's one of the things I really love about hanging out with you. Is you don't
I don't spew.
It's very low on the spewing scale.
Yes, exactly.
I'm sure there's some people that are watching this like, what did I sign up for?
Yeah, really.
They're like,
those people presenting this are wondering, what did we sign up for?
Well, maybe they're like, how are these people able to sell security to C-levels? Like,
It's because we can flip a switch and be serious. Like,
I'm starting to not be able to, believe the social proof just isn't there.
yeah.
I don't know. That was a lot of rambling, guys. Was that rambling?
No,
Rambling.
yeah,
Nope, all informative.
Okay.